Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and Joe Hoyt. Fellas, it was a big football weekend, a really big weekend for the Cowboys going up there. Joe, did you have them beating the Jets? I did.
Yeah, I did too. And I think one thing that kind of gave me that thought was I wasn't in the belief that four offensive linemen down was actually going to hurt them that much, which I know sounds crazy, when you kind of list it out like that. It's something that doesn't happen often. And I think a lot of people's minds went to, hey, remember in 2023 when they had three offensive linemen down and look what Arizona did to them in a surprise win that year. But I just looked at what they had from a depth perspective and who they were replacing. And I didn't think it was going to be that big of an issue with Clayton Adams really organizing things for this run game, and it really wasn't. And also, I think a lot of that goes to Dak Prescott, who is playing fantastic right now. I even asked Nate Thomas yesterday, the starting left tackle on Sunday, like, hey, were there moments where like you let a guy go by you and you're like, oh, that's easily going to be a sack, only to turn around and see Dak Prescott getting the ball out? And he's like, yeah, no, that happened a lot. He's playing at an MVP level.
Yeah, he is. So that's really the crazy thing about this game, or it certainly was Sunday, Joe. As great as the offense played, and it's continued to play for the most part. And I will stay on the record that to me the big difference in all of this is the running game. The fact that they're being able to run the ball and run successfully. I guess Javonte Williams has 5 rushing touchdowns. I think that's as many as they had all year last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's a career high for him too, and we're only through 5 games.
Yeah. I mean, that's unbelievable to me that they have been able to all of a sudden start running the ball as well. And I think it does play to the guys, even the backups are better run blockers. And certainly Terrence Steele is a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker. So it kind of the running game plays to these guys' strengths, doesn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. And I do think one thing we got to preface about this entire Jets game is that is a bad Jets team. But I do think the running game has been a constant. And to your point, Kevin, whether or not it's, this 5 starting offensive linemen out there or 4 backups in there, the running game has been great. Javonte Williams, I found this stat yesterday and it kind of blows my mind. When they signed him, one of the things that was kind of the prevailing idea was, hey, this is a guy that is not getting yards when it's there. You know what I mean? He had negative 83 rushing yards under expected last year. And I bring that stat up a lot for running backs because that's basically saying, hey, with or without offensive line help, what are you doing? What are you doing to make the most out of what's there, or are you not? And he was not doing that last year. Right now, he leads the NFL in 135 rushing yards over expected through 5 games. He's averaging nearly 2 yards a carry more than what's expected of him every single play. Javonte Williams has been a revelation this year. And I have a feature coming out on him later this week. And one thing I've been just trying to drill down with the Cowboys is what did you see that would suggest that this would happen? What did you see that no one else in the league was willing to see? Even Denver said, hey, Javonte, we're going to kick you to the curb. Hey, thank you for your service. Goodbye, because they weren't thrilled with what he had done. And now Javonte Williams is the 3rd leading rusher in the NFL, averaging nearly 6 yards a carry. I mean, he looks fantastic. And one thing that Brian Schottenheimer keeps coming back to is his toughness, his physicality. You saw it on that run right before halftime where he broke through multiple tackles. And he even had the IQ in Schottenheimer's viewpoint to get out of bounds. He wasn't going to score. He was going to get chased down. And instead of cutting it, trying to upfield or staying straight in his path, he veered to the sideline and got out, allowing them to have enough time to call a play and get a touchdown before the half. He has been absolutely fantastic for them.
Yeah, he was out of gas. That was all right. I'd been out of gas too. I tell you, I kind of made this point over and over again. To me, of all the developments on the team over last year, this is the biggest one. It's the most impressive one to me because they have been playing essentially without a running game now for what 3 seasons, maybe 4 seasons. And I think what history shows us about Dak as a quarterback is that it's not good for this team when he's throwing the ball 50 times a game. For the most part, it doesn't work well. And he is so much better in play action. His numbers are so much better in that situation. And we know that Dak is great too as well when he's under pressure. It seems like he does pick that up. That has kind of been a mark of his as well. So he's an unusual quarterback in that from that standpoint. When they've always talked about making the offense, Dak friendly. To me, the best thing they do for him is when they get a running game going, because Uh, what we see now is that you're down to Ryan Flournoy and Tolbert with CD Lamb out, and things still look great, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, Flournoy had a Miles Austin type kind of breakout game yesterday. Obviously, we'll see if it it turns into what Miles Austin's career did. Part of me, I mean, I think we still need to see more. One quick note on Ryan Flournoy. This is a guy that he was a small school guy. He was incredibly small, like literally as a kid. It took him a long time to hit a growth spurt. So he was kind of, from a developmental standpoint, very behind a lot of people, and you kind of saw that last year. This offseason was his first time ever working with a wide receiver trainer. He had never worked with a wide receiver trainer before, which is something that us in North Texas understand, that there's a huge business for that, for kids who are 10 years old and up, to get wide receiver training. This was his first season, and it's already kind of paying off for him. But I do think, one thing that Brian Schottenheimer promised when he was hired was, I'm going to marry the running game to the passing game, which is what a lot of people say. Greg Olson, I thought, had a good note, and he's someone I trust when it comes to viewpoint and kind of all 22. And he said that, if you look at what the Cowboys offense was last year, and they called a lot of Cowboys games last year, it felt like two different offenses. What we're going to do in the run game and what we're going to do in the passing game. It was kind of separation of state. Greg Olson said, no, this is a team that has married that for sure. And I think you can see that. I mean, Dak Prescott right now in play action is completing, I think, over 90% of his passes. It has been a phenomenal thing for them. And it kind of begs the question, how do you stop an offense right now that's top 5 in points and the number 1 yards gaining offense in the NFL? And I think you would say, hey, you got to run maybe some of that too high shell and just kind of keep everything underneath, where you kind of drop back a lot of guys, maybe do a lighter box. But right now you can't do that with the way Javonte Williams is running the ball. So they've kind of figured out a way to be really successful against all different types of fronts right now.
So the offense is working great. But the crazy thing about the Jets game was the defense worked great. So we did hear from Trayvon Diggs that and he'd been begging for a little more man-to-man coverage, and there were indications that that did happen in that game. They did maybe there was some compromise there on defense, on Matt Eberflus' defense. So was that the case, Joe, or what exactly happened to make that work so well, or was it just the fact that it was Justin Fields?
I think there was a little bit more man, I'd probably say. I mean, when it comes to their zone coverages, they do like to do a lot of man match zone coverage, which is essentially man coverage, right? You're saying, hey, this is my zone, but I see this third wide receiver right there. Unless he veers off immediately, he's pretty much my guy as long as he kind of comes in my vicinity, right? So I do think that they were doing some more of that. I do think a lot of the defensive effort goes to a Jets offensive line, frankly, that is terrible. And Justin Fields right now that had nowhere to run. But, there's improvement within that too, because if this was week 1, maybe Justin Fields runs for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, akin to what Jalen Hurts did against them, right? That there was some improvement there. I do think that there's still some ways to go, but when the pass rush is able to kind of take advantage of a bad offensive line like they did against the Jets, Trayvon Diggs called it himself. He's like, we can call whatever we want on the back end if we're getting home that fast. He called it instant grits instead of making oatmeal, right? Like that, it's instant. It doesn't matter. Whatever we have, it works. So I think that that's kind of a huge development for them. If they can kind of keep that pass rush going and kind of, make that something that's a staple for them, that'll be good. My big question about their pass rush, James Houston still remains the guy getting the least amount of snaps in the defensive end rotation. He had about 27, but he leads the team in sacks. Right now, he's on pace for 12 sacks, the same number of sacks that Micah Parsons had last season for the Cowboys. Obviously, at a way different price tag. Is James Houston at his best when he's in a limited role and he can stay fresh? Or is this a guy that deserves more snaps and can kind of keep that going? I'll be honest with you. Part of me thinks that there's a potential that with increased snaps, he could still keep this pace up.
Well, it's interesting because what we saw with him in his history was that like when he was playing for the Lions, right? He had that one season when he had a lot of sacks. I think 9 sacks, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
8 sacks in 7 games.
8 sacks in 7 games. So it's like, how does a guy get 8 sacks in 7 games and then not play anymore? So I guess to that point, and I haven't done it as you put it, a deep dive on James Houston, but he's not a big guy, probably not great against the run, and that's why teams felt like they couldn't do that. Although if a guy can get home, there's got to be a way to get him on the field, right? I mean that's the whole issue. The biggest thing you can do in football, the reason why Micah Parsons commanded the salary he did was because he gets to the quarterback. If you've got a guy who can get to the quarterback, you put him out. I'm not saying you. I don't know if they need to play more or not because he's certainly doing a pretty good job getting back there now. But there's got to be a place for a guy like that, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's also a testament to, in terms of his run defense about what he can kind of improve on. Like I think he's getting better at run defense. That you hit the nail on the head, Kevin, when you said that's the big concern about James Houston is um, what's his kind of durability in terms of kind of dealing with that over and over again, and can it take away from his pass rush? That's the question that they're asking themselves: is, hey, if you run on first and second down against James Houston by third down when you want him to actually get after the quarterback, is that going to be something where he still has energy to do? So I think that's the fascinating question with him. I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of an advocate of him playing more. I think that he has enough energy, stamina, ability against the run to kind of warrant more snaps. He's their best pass rusher, simply put.
All right, now to be the big well, one thing I wanted to ask Evan this question because he should, being from Georgia, he should know this. So the whole thing came up about this instant grits and instant oatmeal thing.
I,
Uh,
I was
and
wondering
I'm
this
not sure that
too.
that's actually right. That oatmeal takes longer than grits. Evan, what is the story on that?
I've only eaten the instant grits at home. They take like a minute, and they're not very good. So I prefer my grits on the outside. That's my take on the grit.
Yeah. But is oatmeal really slower? Is it? Or is it? I wasn't sure about the science on that. Actually,
Yeah,
that just didn't sound right to me.
I think I'm gonna have to try that this weekend. Go buy some oatmeal, go buy some instant grits, and see which takes longer to cook. I don't really like the oatmeal because it's just so mushy.
Yeah, good description. I like that.
I,
Yeah,
and I and I got to tell you, I've been silent through this whole segment for one particular reason, and that's that it was a nice win for the Cowboys, man. It was a nice win, and listen, the only disappointment in the whole thing is that Aaron Glenn wasn't able to run down the sidelines and give us a nice celebration of some type. But I just take nothing out of that. The Jets are the worst team in the NFL, and I don't know that there's a lot that I would take out of that that's going to apply to the rest of the schedule other than some confidence, and that's valuable, and I think the Cowboys will get some confidence from that, but I just don't know how valuable that's going to be, how valuable that win's going to be down the road.
Does that kind of does that performance? Because I'm with you, Evan. Like that's one thing I wanted to preface. That Jets team is bad. That is not a good Jets team. But does it at least give us a glimpse into what the potential could be in terms of if they get a good pass rush? That's kind of where my mind is going. Is like that secondary has been so bad in the first 4 weeks that
Yeah, I
I didn't
mean,
know
if they get a
what to
good
expect.
pass rush, everything changes, right? Because the first 4 weeks, it's looked like they had to score 45 points a week to win. I guess it all changes, but I'm not convinced that what we saw against the Jets constitutes a good NFL pass rush. It constitutes a good pass rush against the Jets. We'll see. Will we see better against Carolina this week? I don't know.
See, I don't
Yeah,
think the Bears are that much better than the Jets, frankly. I think the Bears are okay, and they were awful against the Bears, and we're just out of that game almost immediately. So that's the difference I take in this one is that yeah, the quality of the competition certainly counts in this matter, but pretty much we can tell if they can run the ball, which they couldn't do in the second half against the Bears, right? Then you see the offense really was frustrated at that point. I think that as long as they can run the ball and stay with somebody, they do fine. The question is obviously, can they stop the run? Can And then they were not doing a great job stopping the run against the Jets either. The Jets were still able to run the ball better than you would hope that they would. But they were rushing the passer very well. So to me, going forward, I don't know if the Ebra Plus, defensive plan is really kind of settling in with these guys or not. You would think at some point it would be better than it was because it really, at the pace it was going up to that point, it's as bad a defense as I've ever seen the Cowboys play. I don't know that I've ever seen a worse defense out there. I'm trying to think back the Dave Campo days and think if that was any worse then, and maybe it was, but it was pitiful up to that point. So you would have to think that they would be better than pitiful, because they weren't great last year defensively, obviously, but they weren't horrible either. So I
Is
do think
pathetic better than pitiful?
no, pathetic is worse than pitiful. I think
What's better than pitiful?
pitiful. What's better than pitiful? Lots of things are better than pitiful.
Well,
It's a
what's the next step up from pitiful?
Maligned? Are we going just maligned? Like, oh, critical of them, but hey, I don't know. That's a good question.
I think that all they're asking, and Greg Olson, and let's bring up Greg Olson again, said this during the game. They just have to be average. If they can just get this defense to average, then this is a team with some potential because of the offense. And being an average defense allows them to run the ball and do the things they have to do. If they can't run the ball, they're going to be in trouble in my mind against good teams. And if they can run the ball consistently, then this team has a chance to do some things. Now, I'm not going to make any predictions about playoffs. I'm just not going to do that. It's way too early to make any predictions about them and what they could do and what's.
Geez, last week we were about a 5-win team. Now you're talking about playoffs.
Well,
Playoffs.
Playoffs, yeah. But
I was going to say, I was going to say, and maybe this is just my naivete, and I even said this after the game in our video with Calvin. I have a tendency to go a little too high and too a little low. I'm not Scotty Scheffler in terms of just being that kind of stone cold, consistent, kind of even keel kind of person. But I think maybe where I'm kind of having the problem with the Cowboys is that I'm fluctuating between the glass half full and the glass half empty. I mean, you go look at the Eagles game, right? Like, they are a couple drop passes from their best player from beating the Eagles on the road in the season opener, right? And if they win that game, and hey, they are literally a millisecond away or a ball being kicked up against the Packers from winning that game, right? And obviously you can go to the Giants game and say, hey, they could have lost that one too. But you start looking in the glass half full thing, and that's where I think this big gap is between, hey, they could be a team picking in the top 5 or a team contending for the playoffs, because right now their offense is keeping them on that fluctuating half line. And I think that they're kind of hard to kind of make out right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this is what I want to ask you about the defense. Okay, so remind me again when DeMarvion Overshown is supposed to be ready.
So originally he was kind of setting his goals for Thanksgiving, and he's told me the other day, I'm planning to be earlier than that now. Whether that means he's on the field earlier than that remains to be seen. I don't, I think he was more alluding to the idea that he's going to be practicing. But I'll tell you this, he's already doing full-on drills or full-on like positional drop-back drills on his own, not with the team. Obviously, he's still on, he's still on IR, but he's doing stuff with helmets on his own without a brace. Like, this is a guy that's moving well, very well so far. I don't think before Thanksgiving it's out of the question.
Okay, because that's the issue for me at this team. It's still really light at linebacker, and I think that if we'll see what develops here with the secondary, and then some of these guys start to play a little bit better and maybe kind of catch hold of this scheme. I just still think there's a deficit there, and I think that was probably the big mistake of the offseason. But I would, if we go back to the offensive side, I'm with you about what they've done here. They still don't have great play at tackle between Tyler Guyton and Terrence Steele. Neither one of those guys are going to be making any Pro Bowl teams. But the guys replacing them are probably, Nate Thomas might be better than Tyler Guyton right now. At least it's close. It's not a big drop off. And when you're missing a guy like Tyler Smith, who is a Pro Bowl player, and they still play really well. And we can say what we want about the Jets, but Quentin Williams is pretty good.
Will McDonald is fantastic. Their defensive line is legit.
Yeah. So when you're handling those guys, I do think that there's something to be said for the fact that this is a really deep offensive line. That's one of the things that they said during the broadcast, that in talking to Dak Prescott, that Dak had said that, well, already in his career he was playing with that all-world offensive line, right? But he said, but I think this offensive line is probably deeper than that one. What he's saying there is that no, they're not as good up front as they were back then, and obviously they're not. but when they had to go to the backups, those aren't as big of an issue as they might have been back then either. So, offensive linemen get hurt. People get hurt, and if you've got a little depth, then that's a really good thing. And when you're not noticing it, that it's an issue. And if Dak's getting the ball out quickly, as you noted, well, then that's great too. We're going to talk about Texas OU here in a little bit, and we're going to talk about the fact that Arch Manning is not getting the ball out fast, and it's making the offensive line look even worse than it looks like it's performing when he's doing that. So there are just so many things here that work well for them, and as does the schedule. They're playing Carolina this week. I would expect them to win that game as well. So they can get a nice hot start going here, can't they, Joe?
Yeah, they really can. I mean, you got Carolina this week, and then you got Washington at home. And Washington, they don't look like kind of the world beaters that they were last season. I think that there's potential there. And then you have Arizona, the Raiders, and Denver kind of coming up on the horizon. I think in those 5 games, if you can go 3-2 or 4-1, you look at the rest of this NFC. I mean, this is a potential playoff team. And again, we're now in the we're in the glass half full section of our feelings on the Cowboys right now. Dak Prescott, and the way he's playing, has vaulted them into that part of the kind of equation. But I still think that there's a shot, and it's up to them. The NFC's wide open. If they go 2-3 in this next 5-game stretch, I'm not as confident. But even the back end of the schedule, you start looking at it in teams that were kind of a little bit more scary to start the season. Minnesota looked a lot scarier. The Chargers have kind of cooled off a little bit. There are some teams that look kind of vulnerable in the back end that also looked very difficult. They have a shot. I'll say that. I mean, I'm now in the glass half full thing of they have a shot.
Well, at least until next week, we'll see. But let me ask you this, Joe, because you're a young guy, you're tuned into hip things, because you mentioned the Cardinals. What is it about people when they score touchdowns and they feel like they have to drop the ball as soon as they're crossing the plane of the goal line? For the life of me, this has been such a nightmare, over the league for years now, right? We have it 2 or 3 or 4 times. It happens every year. You would think that these guys would be scared to death that I'm going to drop this at the wrong time. What is the deal?
One of the wildest moments of my sports reporting career has ever happened was Oregon versus Utah. Big game. Oregon ended up going to the national championship that year, but they looked like they were about to go down 14-0 on the road at Utah. And Kalen Clay, on what would have been a 75-yard touchdown, drops the ball. They're celebrating. Everyone's going nuts. A couple Oregon guys look at one of the refs and realize he didn't put up the touchdown signal because Kalen Clay dropped it right before. They pick it up, have a convoy back, touchdown, ends up being a game-changing play. Oregon goes on to win that game. Even in the new Chad Powers show on Hulu, they make note of this, ironically, with Oregon against Georgia, that Oregon loses on the national championship because Glenn Powell drops the ball before he scores. It's mind-blowing to me. I just think in the heat of the moment, you talk to players all the time. I'll ask players, hey, what was that celebration you had? And they're like, I kind of blacked out. I don't know. I think when you have such a free running lane like Amari DeMercado had against the Titans on Sunday, sometimes your mind goes blank a little bit. You're just like, oh, man, I just had a 75-yard touchdown to seal a win, big win. We're going to get back in the NFC West picture, and your mind goes blank. So it's crazy to me. It's something that I think every coach should be showing their team, whether it's NFL, college, high school, Pop Warner this week, and just reminding them because it's so pivotal. That game, the Titans are winless if that play doesn't happen, right? And then subsequent other plays happen too. It's insane to me, Kevin. It really is.
I don't get it. It because it was not an issue. Look, all those years when I was growing up, watching football, it was not an issue. What they were dying to do was, and in Houston especially, was Billy White Shoes Johnson get him to do his rubber legs dance, with the football and then spike it. That was the big thing. We want to be able to spike the ball once we get in the end zone.
I think you fixed it.
Drop it.
I think you fixed it. More celebrations involving the football in the end zone. No one's going to drop it before. You can't lose your tool right before you go in the end zone for your celebration.
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the question. I don't know. All right, that's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast. We thank Joe for coming in, and I just want to let our let our listeners know that Joe came on at the last minute because I dropped the ball. I dropped the ball yesterday before I got to the goal line. I didn't ask him until right before this podcast started, and Joe was ready to jump on because he's a team player, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So
Brian Schottenheimer preaches accountability and what that can do. And you know, Kevin, I appreciate it, but it wasn't needed. But I was happy to be on with you guys as always.
all right, thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. All right. Well, the Rangers made a little news last week. A little late for us, anyway. They had the end of season wrap up on Friday, and we asked all kinds of questions. And why hasn't the manager been signed yet? If Skip Schumaker is your guy, and we have all that discussion, and you write a nice long column about all of that, and I just barely mentioned it in mine because that was and that was very fortunate for my part because then at what time was it? Like at 7:30, 7:45, something like that. They announced
7:45, yeah.
Yeah, they announced, hey, by the way, we've signed Skip Schumaker to be the manager. So
Yeah, and we need to go back and revisit some of this because this was so much fun from last week, in which Kevin was certain that it was a disaster that they didn't name Skip Schumaker Friday morning, and I kept telling him, I think this is just a contract negotiation that's taking a little bit of time. So I'm going to leave it to the fans to figure out whether it was a disaster waiting to happen or whether this was just the natural course of business. I think it was the latter, but Kevin, why don't you lay out your scenario?
well, now Evan's just trying to rub it in here a little bit. But my question
No. I
was,
mean, I think your points are valid. I just do think that it really was the finalization of a contract negotiation.
well, the things that go into my mind when it wasn't happening right away, and I wouldn't expect it to happen the next day, but by the end of the week, when you hear that, well, he's gone back home, he lives in California, and Skip Schumaker does, and that he got back home without a contract, that just doesn't sound good, you know. So look, there's the fact that he walked away from the Marlins job. And now we realize the Marlins are a crazy organization and there's a lot of bad things there. But he did walk away from the job and didn't have a job last year as he was employed by the Rangers as a special advisor. And two, at this moment, if you were to offer me a job either to manage the Rangers or manage the Braves, well, I'm going to take the Braves job because the Braves have a pretty stable organization. That's a place that's pretty used to winning, has a long track record of winning, and maybe I'd rather have that job. Now, I don't even know if he was being considered for that or would have been on anybody's list, but you would think he probably would be, considering the fact he was the NL Manager of the Year 2 years ago and did that. Got the Marlins team to the playoffs. It wasn't a very good team. So to me, not knowing Skip and not, I've never even had a conversation with him, not knowing anything about the situation other than the fact that things didn't go well here at the end for the Rangers this year, and there are some questions about how everything is going to go going forward.
There's a ton of questions.
There's a ton of questions. Well, there's just not just about personnel, but there's questions about how everything's being run. About going forward and about and how what's the communication from the top, right? Because we've got Ray Davis not committing to whether to what the budget's going to be, and pretty much it's a year-to-year budget. It's not a situation where he's committing to something for a 2 or 3 year period at a time. And of course, we've got the labor situation coming up after next season, right?
Yeah.
And I think that has to be a factor with Ray about how much he wants to commit if there's going to be a lockout, which almost certainly there'll be a lockout after next season, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's what the general feeling is because the era of good feelings with labor is over. And I think this group of owners, has come down with union break syndrome where they think they're going to break the union once and for all. And for 55 years, owners have tried to do that and it's never worked. So I think it would be smart if these owners took a different page and said, let's try and be partners with the union and started talking about raising a floor for what payroll should be before they start talking about, once again, oh, we got to rein in payroll, we got to rein in this, we got to rein in that. You want to rein stuff in? Stop offering guys 10-year deals for $700 million. End of story. That's on you. It's not on the players. But that's a conversation for next year, because nobody wants to talk about labor until they absolutely have to. I just want to go back to a couple of things. What I've gotten to know of Skip and the people I've talked to about him, I want to lay out this scenario for you, Kevin. I really think that, he came in here with the idea that he was the succession plan. And I think that Skip is very deliberate, and I think he's very intentional in the way he does things. And he invested a year in getting to know this organization from the top down. And I think he feels very comfortable with that knowledge. And I think he feels that that's an asset going into that job, that he's got as much preparation for this job as he could have, more preparation for this job than he could have for any other club. Now, do the Giants or the Braves potentially have more financial stability? Yes. I don't think he's looking at the long term. I think he's looking at what can I do with the team on the field and what's coming through the system. And so he got to know the organization from the top down, Chris Young on down. He got to know these players to some extent and had some conversations with players. I think he got to know the system and the people inside the system. So I think when it was all said and done, Skip just wanted to make sure that the contract situation would line up. But I think he was very comfortable with what he was getting himself into and wanted to make sure that he was going to have used this year as an advantage going forward. And I think that's really what it came down to. And as I wrote on Friday night, all things considered, this is warp speed at managerial hiring. All those jobs that have come open in the last week, nobody else has named a manager.
Well,
And so
nobody had one in house either, though.
nobody had one in house, and the Rangers may have had two in house, because Nick Hundley, who was a senior advisor the last couple of years to Chris Young, looks like he's the leading candidate in San Francisco, and he would have been, I think, the number one fallback if Schumaker had not taken this job. So I do think that everything for the Rangers, everything has worked out as well as it possibly could, because they got the guy who was going to be the hottest commodity on the managerial market.
Now, let me ask you this. Was it a little weird having Bruce Bochy's successor in-house? Everybody knew he was the guy, and he's around the players too?
Was it? Well, he wasn't around the players other than like coming in for a series where he'd be in the dugout for the pregame stuff, just like any special assistant, just like, like Dayton Moore, Michael Young, or Nick Hundley. And I think, look, it was very clear he was the potential successor. And I listened to a podcast that Skip did with Scott Linebrink earlier this year, and Skip talked about that the first thing that happened after he was hired by the Rangers was he got a call from Bruce Bochy. Well, he actually ran into Bruce Bochy at a getaway, a retreat that a baseball guy does for a bunch of guys inside the game. And the first thing that Boch said to him was, "Hey, I'm looking forward to learning from you." And that, that really stuck with him. And I think that speaks to Bruce Bochy's security, that he was like more than happy to have somebody else in there offering thoughts or ideas. Not that Skip was in on anything on a daily basis, but just the idea that, hey, Skip could come in here. I welcome voices. I want to listen to everybody. I want to hear from everybody. I'm not really threatened by any of that stuff, and so I think it worked well for both those guys.
Yeah, I would think so. Well,
I think with a less accomplished manager, that would have been a real concern.
it
But
would have been a real concern from the get go. When you're talking, look,
right,
it's a different manager, and of course, and Bruce was a lot older, right, than most managers, and so maybe in some ways that's a kind of understandable situation where you have a successor in house, where he's pretty much everybody knows that he was hired to do that. Whereas if it's a 45, if it's Chris Woodward and you bring in a guy and say here's the successor and waiting for Chris Woodward, well, no
Right.
one's going to believe in that.
Right.
So I do think that the fact that it was Bruce Bochy makes it.
Oh, it's 100% that it's Bruce Bochy.
Okay.
I mean, with a less secure manager or a less accomplished manager or a younger manager, yeah, I think that there would be some real insecurities there.
Okay. So let's talk about what's going to happen now, because Sean McFarland wrote just this week that this is a manager and maybe who's a little more equipped. And I don't know that he didn't really say more equipped. I think that Bruce Bochy can manage any kind of team, but Schumacher certainly understands working without some great material, because he didn't have great material in Florida when he was there, and they were able to scratch out runs and and a lot of that was based on a guy that I have already pushed for the Rangers. I wish they would seek out the Padres second baseman Luis Arias. And I found a YouTube video with him after they had traded Arias and they were playing the Padres, and Skip went on and on about him, talking about what a great human being he is, what a light he is in the clubhouse, what energy he brings. And and you and I have discussed this, Evan. He's kind of bounced around a little bit, and the Padres didn't make a commitment to him. And for a guy who's a 3-time batting champ, that seems a little odd. But the issue is that he's not a great second baseman. He doesn't have much pop. He doesn't run all that well, but he makes contact. Nobody makes contact like he does. He has the lowest whiff rate in baseball in 675 at bats. That's a lot of at bats. 675 at bats, 21 strikeouts.
Yeah.
And to me, if this is what you want to be, you want a team that makes more contact. He doesn't draw a lot of walks either. That's another issue. So his OBP is not that great for a guy who's hitting as well as he is. But the fact that he's putting the ball in play all the time, to me, and if he is the kind of person that Skip Schumaker was talking about, and we think that this clubhouse needs a little more energy, maybe needs that kind of guy who is a really good person to come in. And not saying that they're a bunch of bad guys either, but you like a guy who's going to come in here and be a good guy and be a positive energy in the clubhouse, right?
Yeah, you would like all of that. But I also think, like, look, you're gonna have to think long and hard about this. He made $14 million this year. You got to expect that he's going to get a bump off of that, and unless the Rangers start moving some contracts, they've got maybe one place where they can add a $14 or $15 million player, and that right now probably needs to be at catcher, because there's really one catcher on the market in JT Realmuto, and he's another presence guy. And so I think that catching needs to be their first priority in addressing this roster.
Is that what he would probably go for? Now, I understand that the Dodgers are interested in him, and I'd hate to be competing with the Dodgers.
I don't know why with Will Smith there. I don't know why the Dodgers would want him unless they want him as a backup.
Well, I'm sure that's probably the thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he'd want to go somewhere to be a backup.
He caught 135 games last year for the Phillies,
Yeah.
or this year for the Phillies. I mean, that's phenomenal at his age. He's catching 135 games.
Yeah, I think the Rangers would love for him to catch 100 or 110 games, and I think that would be perfect for how you want to use Kyle Higashioka to keep his body fresh. He is a guy who grew up in Oklahoma City, so there's some local contact or local connection there. And who knows what happens with the Phillies? They're down 2-0-2 as we speak about this, and if they lose this division series, maybe they do let some of these free agents go. If they win, maybe they want to bring them. If they last longer, maybe they want to bring them all back. I don't know, but for me, Kevin, that is where the market's so thin at catcher, and the need is so great at catcher that's got to be my first priority, especially with a guy who is, a frontline starter, a winner, and who has the reputation of being a strong clubhouse presence. So if I was prioritizing right now, I think if I was prioritizing in the real world, which is like trying to guess what Ray Davis's final financial numbers are going to be, if it's somewhat limited, I think JT would be my first option.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that, and you're right. I'm just thinking about the fact that on Arias, he's still only like what 28, 29 years old.
He'll be 29 next year. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I just like that. And I think that to make that work with him, and unless you're going to trade Marcus Simeon and dump that contract, he'd probably end up playing mostly first base or DH in anyway. And I don't know if Arias wants to do that.
And I think this club also needs to rethink the DH role, because you've got to get more games at DH for Corey Seager. You've got to find a way to keep his body fresh, rested, and give him periodic days off at shortstop. And so I think that, they've got Jock there. Jock obviously isn't going to play against left-handers. If they find a way to move Jock and eat some of that money, or a lot of that money, maybe they get back to a situation where they're rotating the DH through the lineup a little bit. But I do think that that's also got to be a priority for the Rangers, is that they have some more fluidity at the DH position.
Fluidity. What you're saying is they weren't drinking enough fluids?
Well, Kumar Rocker wasn't that night that he needed pickle juice on the mound. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not expecting any
We
surprises
should have known
here.
there were problems with the Rangers when guys were doing shots on the mound.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We were doing shots watching them. So you don't expect any surprises from the standpoint of well, I don't know. I mean, I thought first of all, we didn't really get a lot of good information at that season wrap up about what's going to happen here, and I'm not expecting Chris Young to tell us anything. But I can remember when he was still working for John Daniels, and there was something about him at that season wrapper in which he indicated he was practically giddy, and I guess at that point he knew he was signing Corey Seager and Marcus Simeon at that point. And I think maybe that was what did it. But you could just tell it at that point. I don't know at this point, that he doesn't yet know what his payroll is going to be. He's told us it's going to come down. It will not go over the threshold, which is going to be what 244 million next year.
It was 241 this year. I think it goes up to 243, 244 next year. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, to me, in my mind, it has to be right there. That you can't afford to drop it down to 230 or to 220 or whatever, that we could entertain. That's
Listen,
just
I'll give more latitude. I'm okay with them going back down to 230. I think you can basically construct a club at about 230 to 235. But the question for me is, if you start going to if Ray Davis comes in and says, I want to keep this payroll under $200 million, I don't know how you construct a championship team, because you've got $144.5 million committed to 6 players. And if you've got $200 million to work with, that gives you $55 million to construct 3/4 of your roster.
yeah, that's undoable. I wrote that last week about what Ray
Well,
Davis.
I'm gonna stop you right there 1 second, because I want to get into your column, but I will say this: it's not undoable, but it requires you to move one or more of those big salaries, and the only guys that you can move and not have to eat significant money would probably be Corey Seager and Jacob deGrom.
Yeah. Those are not the kind of guys that Chris Young wants to dump. But after I wrote that about the Rangers, I had several people on Twitter say basically that this is what everybody always says. It's just the easy thing to say is for the owner. And I'm thinking, first of all, why would anybody want to defend a billionaire? I don't understand that thinking at all. And secondly, the point I made to them was that look, if your farm system is not developing players, look, yeah, there are plenty of teams in the playoffs and plenty of good teams that have payrolls under what the Rangers are doing. but they're relying on what their farm teams have supplied them, right? Cheap labor. The Rangers don't have much cheap labor. I went back and looked at the difference between the Astros and the Rangers this year. And if you look at the top 7 players for both teams, according to WAR, the top 7 players for the Astros were making a combined $32 million this year. The top 7 players for the Rangers were making $132 million this year. What that tells me is that the Rangers are paying the right guys, right? Because the Astros have a payroll bigger than the Rangers did this year. So the fact that they got their highest paid guys were making the money they should, but what it also tells you is that the Astros are getting a lot more mileage out of their cheap labor than the Rangers are. And for all the talk about, that's the one thing that just mystified me at the press conference was that Chris Young keeps talking about younger players next year. And I wanted to say, what younger players are you talking about? Because
Yeah.
the guys who came on at the end of the year, they were nice little scrappy guys, but those guys can't play 150 games.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the one thing that I found a little bit, and I don't want to diminish Michael Hellman, because I think that he had a really nice year here. The Rangers targeted him when he was going to, as far back as last year, hoping that he would be in minor league free agency. And maybe they've seen some things and maybe they've unlocked a little bit there. Okay. So I don't want to diminish that too much, but listen, he is 29. And you're basing this basically on 100 or so, 125 at bats. And Michael Hellman's name was mentioned at least 2 or 3 times during that press conference. And I think it was only because of this. If you're Chris Young and you had to pick guys who overachieved among your offensive players, where else do you go?
Oh, no
Wyatt
question.
Langford's OPS went up a little bit, and that was nice. And the fact that Wyatt Langford didn't go through a real sophomore slump, that was nice. But nobody else reached their career norms. Nobody. And if you look at the young core of the Rangers, the quote unquote young core, all right, so you got Wyatt Langford. He's a player and he should be a star next year. Evan Carter, we still don't know if he can ever play a full season at this point. Josh Young really regressed this year. And that's it, man. That's it. Then your bright spots are that Cody Freeman came up and he was a sparky little guy who I think can be a utility guy on a championship club. At about 150, 200 at bats, but that's not an everyday player. And Michael Hellman. And Michael Hellman's a 29-year-old guy who also might be a really nice utility player and might be much more usable than, say, Ezekiel Duran. But we're not talking about core players here.
No, and I would let's say this too about Michael Hellman on the good side. He can play the infield. He can even play shortstop. So he's a guy that has some versatility to him and be worth having. And yes, I would rather have him than Zeke Duran at this point. I think that Zeke's time has run out here, and I just don't see a future for him. And I think also that what Chris Young is doing here is saying that, look, all you other guys, this is the kind of thing I want to see. And so that's why he's making a big deal out of all this. I don't think that message goes very far with those players. I think they all look at him like, hey, we all like Michael Hellman too. But, we got track records here, and Michael Hellman doesn't.
Well, I do think, to your point on that, I do think that there is this element now, or this will be a focus of the offseason, that the players that the Rangers acquire, they want to have a quote unquote, which is going to be a real ethereal thing to try and figure out, a winning player profile, which is scrappy, plays hard, all that stuff. Doesn't mean not talented, but it means that they, in addition to whatever talent they have, they do that. The one thing I worry about, and I think that, we saw this play out a little bit with the roster construction this offseason, is the Rangers went, we're going to go for slug. We're going to go for guys who hit fastballs. Well, first of all, they didn't hit fastballs this year. And secondly, you saw the issue when you have a team that just tries to slug, especially in a ballpark that suddenly played bigger. You don't, when your guys aren't on a tear, you get nothing offensively. So I'd hate for the Rangers to try and overcompensate too much this year. I think they need to add some guys who who have presence and are gritty, but I don't think they need to basically make themselves into a team full of little rascals.
No, they don't. They don't need to do that. And look, if that's if those guys are Lenny Dykstra, then I'm all good with that.
Well,
But
maybe let's not use Lenny Dykstra as an
no,
example.
you're not a Lenny Dykstra fan.
Well, I mean, Lenny had his issues maybe off the field a little
Well,
bit.
he did. But on the field, he was pretty great. I mean, I listen. I love that style of play, and I love what Cody Freeman brought, and I did love the fact that this is exactly what you do with two strikes, right? This guy's
Yeah.
approach. Everybody needs to pay more attention to that. All right,
I'll tell
that's
you
going
what,
to be.
rather than Lenny Dykstra, can we leave it at this? If they put together a team of Michael Young and Ian Kinslers, I'd be completely okay.
Well, that's a little different. One of those guys was a 30-30 guy, and the other one was only the Rangers' all-time hits leader, I believe. Is that not correct? Is
That's
Michael
correct.
not?
Well,
Yeah.
Lenny Dykstra was a pretty good player. He wasn't just a little
No, but
scrappy guy.
I'd say that those guys were almost in Lenny Doctor's league. I mean, in some ways, they might have been just as good.
Yeah.
You know what the thing about I loved about Michael, now that you mentioned that, is that, and I told him this one time, and he appreciated it. I never saw a guy throw a better relay than Michael Young.
Oh,
That
I think Michael Young's case for the Hall of Fame would have been significantly better had he been able to stay at second base his entire career.
oh,
He
no
was a
question on that.
legit Gold Glove caliber second baseman, and he hurt his career value by being willing to move to shortstop.
Yeah, yeah, and people didn't remember him the way they should have. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk about the colleges, and we're going to talk about expressly about Texas OU. The as I say every year, the greatest annual sporting event in Texas is Texas OU. It doesn't really matter so much how good either one or the other is. It's just the setting, the state fair, the Cotton Bowl. It's just a great day. And then you have all that history and the fact that more often than not, you get more upsets at Texas OU than you do any other time, which is really good news for Texas because I'm shocked that they are just 2.5 point underdogs as we're recording this on Tuesday. I would think they'd be a lot worse than that. I'm assuming that's because Michael Hawkins is supposed to start, and he started last year's game in which the Sooners scored 3 points. So I would think that's the only reason why the line is close at this moment. But we have news as we're recording this that John Mateer, the fine young quarterback for Oklahoma, who was out, had a hand surgery. He is trying as hard as he can to get back for this game, and he is saying that he will be back. That changes things significantly if he does play. Now I don't know how well he'll play with this. He supposedly has a brace or something on his hand. I just don't understand how any of this works. How any of the medical people clear him for this kind of thing when they said that he would probably be out at least another 2 weeks after this week. So we'll see if that happens. That's certainly what Steve Sarkisian is planning on. He is planning or banking on the fact that Mateer is going to play. And if he does, he's really good. He really moves well. He's kind of a Dylan Gabriel kind of quarterback, and probably better than Gabriel was, although he looked plenty good against Texas the last time he played them. So this would present some real problems. So Evan, you watched the game against Florida. I was on my way to TCU, and then was there at that game, and didn't get to really watch much of it. I just saw some highlights. What was your takeaway?
Well, one takeaway was probably Warby Parker needs to stop the Arch Manning commercials for the time being. Because one of them aired, I believe, during the game, and it was not good timing because Arch Manning didn't really look like he was seeing very well.
Maybe he's wearing the shades. Maybe that's the problem.
The other thing for me was I was surprised by how Texas was dominated at the offensive line of scrimmage. Florida was constantly in the backfield. He was constantly Arch was constantly under pressure. And listen, for me, Kevin, the biggest problem was that there was no in between there. Like either they were in the backfield and he was running for his life to try and get rid of the ball, or he held the ball too long And when Texas did give him protection and the pocket eventually collapsed, he's still holding on to the ball. So I think Arch needs to work on trusting his release or trusting his reads better. But I thought that the biggest issue I had with him in decision making was I feel like he held the ball way too long.
Yeah, he does hold the ball too long. I noticed that last year in the times he played when he wasn't playing, in either of his 2 starts, he looked great, but he was playing teams that weren't very good, and that's what he looks like. When he's playing teams that aren't very good, well, everything looks great. When he's playing teams that are better, he does stand back there, and he looks just a little lost on his progressions, and you just simply can't do that. And so that's one problem. But the offensive line clearly is not playing very well because they're not running the ball either. You know, they
But this is what I still struggle with, right? I felt like Trey Wisner was a pretty good running back.
yeah. Well, I
Why
mean,
are they?
they're not running it well. They're not running it enough. I mean, in that game against Florida, they ran for 52 yards, and 37 of those came from Arch. So
Yeah.
15 yards from your running backs. That's pitiful. So or pathetic. However, Evan, whatever one you think is worse, pitiful, pathetic, probably that's what I'll go with. And that is pathetic. So,
Yeah.
it wasn't just that against Florida. It was also, you got a punt block for a safety. Your defense gave up 29 points, and this has been a really good defense going into that game. And then, it's been the one thing that I gave for me, if you're a Texas fan, that would give you hope was that the defense is really good. I think it's early in the season, I thought it played as well as any Texas defense I've seen in the last few years, um, and and they were terrible in that game. So it kind of gave you the idea that maybe things are starting to fall apart a little bit here. Maybe everybody's looking at this like, wow, we went from being the number one team in the nation to now we're in free fall. And there's no question about that. Your very first SEC game, and you lose that one, and now you have 2 losses, and that tells me that doesn't mean you're out of it yet, right? Because teams get in the playoffs with 2 losses, but now you got to run the board, to run the
Yeah.
table. That's it. You got to win them all now. And how are you going to beat all these other teams that are still left, including Georgia, including Oklahoma, if you couldn't beat Florida? You for at least another week, you saved Billy Napier's job.
Oh, well, let's just, you mentioned Oklahoma, you mentioned Georgia, obviously A&M.
Yes,
And, even the pushovers aren't pushovers, since Vanderbilt's ranked number 20. The good thing that Texas has going for them in 3 of those games is that, or well, 2 of them, and one of them in Dallas, is 2 of them are at home. The Georgia game is in Athens, and I mean Georgia's lost 1 game in Athens since 2019. So I don't one league game in Athens since 2019, I think it is. So I that's going to be a real hurdle for them. I I just feel like, and this goes back to the Ohio State game, and maybe I glom on to things too quickly and feel like I have to validate them all throughout the season. But I just feel like Sark got caught up in the Arch Manning hype and trusted everything for Arch to make this offense go. And I think the way Texas needed to get into the season was the offense needed to make Arch go, that he needed to be able to drive the bus a little bit more and then kind of come into his own. I think too much has been thrust on him too quickly, and I do think that things are now falling apart, are kind of coming apart at the seams. It's not completely undone, but I think Texas has a lot of work, and it is no easy schedule. A&M is number 5, Georgia's number 10, Oklahoma's number 6. These are big time games.
yeah, they are very big time games. But the thing I don't understand, Evan, is that I respect Steve Sarkisian's offensive abilities. Everybody does, right? And this guy has coached some big time quarterbacks in his time, and he did it at Alabama. He did it at USC. He did it at Texas. I mean, you can say what you want about Quinn Ewers. He delivered. I mean, he won a lot of games. He won some games in some big places. He won in Tuscaloosa. He won in
Yes,
Michigan.
and then the
Yeah,
Texas fanship basically wanted to run Quinn Ewers out of there.
absolutely. He'd look pretty good to them right now, I think.
Yeah.
He handled Oklahoma. So I think what I don't understand is what's going on here. I mean, what is he not seeing? What is Sark not seeing in his quarterback? And obviously, he has to go with him now. He can't. He can't look if he deserts. Arch at this point. I don't know that's going to do anything more for them than it would have done last year if he had benched Quinn Ewers, which there was no reason to do that at any point, even though fans kept calling for it. So I just don't understand what the problem is here. But I'll say this: if Arch Manning does not start to play any better than he's playing right now, I don't think he can come back to Texas next year. We've
Right.
talked about whether he was going to turn pro or not, but there has to be some kind of step up here because you cannot go through an entire season of this and then expect to come back next year and make, oh, okay, everything will be okay now. I don't see anything right now that tells me that can work.
Listen, I think there are so many different factors in when it comes to judging teams this early in the season now. Um, I don't ever degrade the idea of what NIL has done and the transfer portal has done. You are turning teams over left and right, and there's so many new faces. I think it takes 4 or 5 games for a team to really kind of gel. But we haven't seen improvement from Texas, right? We haven't seen any gradual improvement there, have we?
Well,
Has there
no, I
been
mean
have you seen
after
a game this
the
year where you said, "Okay, this is a big step forward"?
well, I mean, the Ohio State game, that's a huge game to start the season with. And look, Texas played pretty even though they lost, it wasn't a runaway. It was fine. It wasn't an awful loss,
Right.
They were still fine after that. Yes, Arch needed to play better, but it wasn't awful. And then they didn't play anybody for a month. And then your first SEC game back, well, it's like, no, this is decidedly worse than the loss to Ohio State, and you're playing a team that is diametrically opposed to Ohio State here, and you're losing like that. That was just that was the worst thing that could have happened in my mind to Texas at this point because this was okay. All right, had a month now to get over the whole Ohio State loss, and this is how you play after all of that.
And look, the scheduling was fine, right? Because you go out and you play Ohio State, you get a taste of you get a great first game, you get a taste of elite competition, you get a taste of what the road is going to be like, okay? But it's not an SEC game, it doesn't hurt you in the conference. And that scheduling may help you. And then you have that whole month of okay, now we're basically going to play our exhibition games where we can work out all the kinks, where we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
get everything set so that when we go into the SEC schedule, we are going to be clicking. And they didn't click, man. They just didn't click at all. And I just go back to this. I do think, right, Sark was a quarterback. He loves quarterbacks. He's never had a more talented, raw, skilled quarterback than Arch Manning. And I do think, as you said, he's done a great job with some quarterbacks. I think this is maybe a situation where he's gotten blinded by the fact that he so believes in this kid and so trusts this kid that he's given him more on his plate than he can handle early. That's maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that's what I'm coming away with.
Yeah, I think there's certainly I kind of said it all along since the Ohio State game. I just felt like he needed to let him drive the bus and rely more on the running game. But then they had no running game against Florida, so I don't know what you do at that point. Let me say this before we get out of here because we need to bring this up too. Is that so? You mentioned that Texas A&M is ranked fifth in the country. They still have their issues on offense with Marcel Reed and Mike Elko spoke to that when he talked about his anxiousness. I think anxiousness was the wrong word. Mike's a really smart guy, but I think what he meant was he's just a little hyped up at early in games and he's a little inaccurate, a little wild. But he always settles down, and that defense is great. They are playing some great defense, and they play Florida this week, and it's going to be at Kyle Field, and that's a different thing when you're playing a home game as opposed to going into the swamp. But we'll see how A&M handles DJ Lagway with Dallas Wilson, and that has made a difference in Florida's attack now, having that caliber of wide receiver coming back. DJ
Dallas
hasn't had
Wilson was really impressive. He
yeah,
was
he's
really
really good.
impressive.
He's a pro prospect. I mean,
Yeah.
he's going to be playing the NFL next year. So That makes a difference.
But
When you
after
have
Florida, they've got 3 straight road games, and one of them's at Arkansas, which they should win, obviously. Then they go to LSU, and then November 8th they're at Missouri, which is number 14 right now. So but they need to beat Florida, and that's going to be their real test, is that LSU Missouri stretch before they get to Texas.
no question about that. But I tell you what, if they stomp the Gators, which they should, then Texas ought to be really nervous about that game the day after Thanksgiving.
Sure.
Because I think that the Aggies, and who saw all this coming? I mean, the one thing about Texas coming to the SEC was it was the A&M nightmare. In their very first season, Texas goes to the playoffs and makes the semifinals. In
Sure.
the SEC, they win the SEC, and they go. This is like the A&M nightmare. And it seemed like that this was just going to be doubling down on it this year. I thought that the Aggies had a chance to be pretty good, but I thought that Texas was going to be just as good as they were last year. And they're not going to be. They're not right now for sure. So
I'll just say this: before we end this thing we need to spend 12 seconds at least mentioning that Texas Tech is now number 10 in the country, right?
Yeah, Texas Tech's the real deal. If they don't win the Big 12, then they've really screwed up because, in my mind, they are clearly the best team in the Big 12 at this point. BYU's pretty good too. We'll see how that goes with them. I don't see anybody else in the league challenging them. I don't think TCU's as good. TCU can't run the ball, and Tech is just a lot more, is a much better balanced, and they really shut down a pretty good Houston team, 35-11.
And they got a huge, on Saturday, not only did they shut down Houston, they also got a huge commitment for next year.
I didn't see that. Who'd they get?
Oh, the Cedar Hill defensive tackle.
Oh, wow. Didn't see that. Well, I'm sure they're going to get them. This is what's going to happen now, that not only are they going to draw them because of what they're paying, but also because they're winning. If you're winning and paying, that's a pretty good combination.
Paying and winning and paying.
That's right, pal. All right. So that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week to talk more about this and see if the Cowboys are really for real, although I don't think beating Carolina Panthers is going to be kind of an answer to that question.
And next week, I'll keep winning, and Kevin will keep paying.
Yeah, exactly. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.